Want to welcome everyone. Welcome. My name is Uri Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Slifka Center for Jewish Life at Yale. And together with Rabbi Jason Rubenstein, the Howard M. Holtzmann Jewish Chaplain, I want to welcome everyone who has joined us tonight for this evening's Slifka Online Salon entitled Lessons from the Jewish Future, What Jewish Life on Campus Today Can Teach Us About American Jewish Life in 2050. This topic is near and dear to us here at Slifka Center, as it should be for anyone who's invested in the Jewish future. Our featured speaker tonight is a friend and colleague of mine over a number of years and the leader of the Hillel movement, Adam Lehman, Hillel International's president and CEO. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Adam. More on tonight's program in a moment. Everywhere I go, people ask me, what's happening on the college campuses? Is it safe for Jews there? What's the Israel situation? And aren't you worried about anti-Semitism? Yes, those are the questions that everyone wants to hear about. And yet they are my least favorite questions to answer. Not because I don't have good answers, just try me. No, they're my least favorite questions because of how comparatively uninteresting they are compared to the vitality, diversity, and creativity that's happening on campuses across the world every single day as Jewish life continuously gets reforged for its next 100 years. And yet, everyone still asks the dull questions. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about why. People talk about college campuses as ground zero for political and other kinds of disagreements. They examine the ways controversies play out there and often criticize either the students or the administrations or both. Some take the opportunity to reflect on what they did or would have done if they had been on campus now. Some people applaud and some condemn, all from the safety of their living rooms, and some from behind the harmful anonymity of social media. I remember back in November 2019, sitting at the Yale-Harvard football game, affectionately known as the game, with amazing alumni I know who are in their 70s. When students from both universities stormed midfield, holding signs and doing chants, advocating the divestment of both universities' endowment funds from Puerto Rican debt and companies with abysmal environmental track records. 2019. At first, the crowd thought it was cute, but then fans started getting annoyed that their game was being delayed so much, and they booed. The alumni I was with shared both of these emotions, but ultimately reflecting on what they themselves had done when they were in college, concluded, good for the students. These alumni get it. So many do not. The generational divide described here is, I think, the main reason why the media and so many of us focus on college campuses as flashpoints, news fodder, and sources of alternating optimism and despair about the next generation. It's hard to remember what life was like when we were younger, more aspirational and less flattened by real-world experience. Also difficult is the task for those on the younger end of the spectrum to understand the wisdom that comes with age and experience they simply don't have. And furthermore, with a world like the one we live in, who can really say for sure then that what those of us who are older have to teach is really better anyway? As Jews, we have an additional layer added to this complex picture. It's in our DNA to be worried about Jewish survival. And in 2021, many of us live the best lives any Jews have lived in history. And yet, anti-Semitism is on the rise again. And the Jewish future is hardly secure, even here in America. In my own work, I have seen the generational divide cause fissures that divide families, communities, and the Jewish people by any definition. Israel is one such fissure causer, but by no means the only one. This is more complicated than political affiliation or policy. The role that age plays cannot be overstated. Older generations control finances, institutions, and wield enormous influence. And yet, the future will be written by the young. For these reasons, I'd like to posit that the Jewish community should start looking forward immediately and learning everything we can about how to make our Jewish institutions, values, and actions resonant for the next generation. The one that is on campuses, physical or virtual, right now. This puts Hillel squarely in the bullseye, as we have both the experience and the tools to teach others what the future holds and what makes today's college students and young adults, the millennials and Gen Z, tick. We can't tell you what the Jewish future holds, just who is next to join it and how to engage them. No one other than Hillel can do that, and we need your help to keep doing it. On to tonight's program. As usual, Rabbi Jason Rubenstein will introduce tonight's speaker and facilitate the ensuing discussion. He will also take questions and comments in the chat, which can be found along the bottom of your Zoom screen. We also want to thank our partners at Hillel at Home, a program of Hillel International, for their assistance with promotion and logistics for tonight's event. We want to remind you that this session is being recorded and will be available on our website along with recordings of our previous Slifka Center salons. We also hope you'll take a moment to fill out the brief survey at the end. We are excited to share these salons with all of you in keeping with Slifka Center's goals, to explore the intersection of what is Jewish, American, and Yale in our constantly changing world. It's now my pleasure to turn over the program to my friend, teacher, and colleague, Rabbi Jason Rubenstein.
Good evening. Thank you, Ori, for that introduction, and thank you to all y'all who are out here, and to Jamie and Adam for being the stars of tonight. It's a special thing when people are, bedraggled and kind of underwater, just keeping our heads above water, and to come together in a community of inquiry and learning to find something about the world and about the future is a great thing that you're all doing and creating that community with and for one another tonight. So our presenter this evening is Adam Lehman, the president and CEO of Hillel International. And Adam is deeply involved in the Jewish community in Washington, D.C., where he lives, and has been a major lay leader in many capacities there, comes from a background in business and software, and this is going to bring you back in America Online. I still miss AIM. And also he holds a JD from a different school up in Cambridge. We won't hold that against him tonight. And Adam, just someone I want to share personally is a delight and inspiration to speak to, the way he speaks and the way he listens. And I think both of those are going to be on display. So we've got a couple kind of rounds of back and forth prepared. And then from that point on, for everyone on this call, it's a choose your own adventure. So I hope you'll be sending in questions in the chat. And then we'll be able to take some of those and you'll be able to put Adam on the spot, just like I get to. And the conversation will kind of flow from there. So post questions in the chat. You can send them to me, but it's more interesting if you send them to everyone. And people can also respond in the chat. It's its own space for dialogue. So let's get started. Adam, if you would tell us just off the bat, give us a picture kind of what Hillel International is kind of and isn't, maybe what it used to be, how it came to be organizationally, what it's doing right now. And then from there, what you see about this generation of Jews and who they are, what you're learning descriptively, what are the most important things for all of us to know about who the young Jewish people are on America's college campuses and the context they're operating in.
Great, thank you, Rabbi Jason and Uri. I'm so glad to be here for this program and time together. I not only want to give a shout out to what a terrific team Hillel has at the Slifka Center, evidenced by this program and really the ongoing effort to adapt their work to meet the needs of students and the broader community. It inspires me in terms of what I try to do from the Hillel International level with my colleagues there. I also should say, although I did go to other universities for my own education, I spent many a weekend, I must say, in New Haven at Yale. It was literally decades ago, so man, I'm getting old, but fond memories of Yale, New Haven, and the Jewish community there. In terms of the first part of your question, Jason, I'm happy to explore this in further detail if people want to hear it. The role of Hillel International to me is ultimately just about supporting Jewish life on campus around the world. We have Hillel's present on more than 550 campuses with 1,200 outstanding professionals, including the team here at the Slifka Center. So fundamentally, as a movement, we are trying to make sure that we can recruit, train, and support the best talent for the Hillel movement so that in turn they can support, engage, and inspire Jewish students. In the last academic year, we were successful in engaging more than 140,000 total students through the Hillel network. It's really a privilege that we have to be able to work with students and provide that scope and level of engagement and support. We also, at the Hillel International level, seek to provide resource, because at the end of the day, Hillel doesn't just happen. Hillel happens because we have talented professionals, because we have the resources on campus to support programs, physical and otherwise. And so we partner with not only the Slivka Center, but hundreds of Hillel affiliates to try to make sure those resources are present. And finally, just to facilitate connections across the Hillel movement, much in the way that this program and event is facilitating a community centered at the Slivka Center and at Yale. We try to bring together Hillel professionals, student leaders, lay leaders from across the movement, so we can all learn from one another, not reinvent the wheel, and really drive forward toward the next 100 years, as Uri said, that we are trying to create and animate in terms of Jewish life and our work with broader communities. So that's the dog and pony in terms of Hillel International as a frame and in support of individual Hillels across the movement. I want to shift to the descriptive question, as you put it. What are we seeing about this generation of Jewish students? And I want to actually stick to our frame. What can we learn from 2050? So what are the elements, as we, God willing, will be sitting here 30 years from now, that we will see this generation evolve into and define for the Jewish community at that point? Number one, I'll start with the conventional. Anyone and maybe everyone on this Zoom remembers 2013 and the Pew study and then all of the after effects of that. So there are some conventional things that we see on campus today, and we will absolutely see in 2050, a far more diverse, what I'll call Jewish connected community. And so the Pew study, dialed in on this notion of intermarriage. I would think a little more broadly around the way in which Jewish families are constructed and how that's reflected in Jewish students today. But you can imagine 30 years from now, we are going to see a much wider variety of the way in which Jewish families exist, situations where you have a single Jewish parent who is the child of a family that had a single Jewish parent. You get into the whole matrilineal, patrilineal, other connected. I'll come back, or we'll come back hopefully in talking about the implications of that. To me, just descriptively, we're going to have a much different and more diverse overall Jewish connected community. And it is going to go far beyond family construct or how people came to be connected to Jewish life. It is going to be in terms of their other identities. We already see on campus today, more than 20% of Jewish students that we interact with across Hillel identifying as Jews of color. That number is going to continue to grow, and in 30 years, you can, I think, fairly project that number in America is going to be north of 30%. We already know when we look at the community in Israel and those of Mizrahi background, you're going to be looking at more than 50% of Israelis who will identify as certainly different than coming from an Ashkenazi background or Caucasian in the way they identify. In terms of, so those to me are that's the low hanging fruit in terms of just massively more, I think, diversity as you look forward. The things that may be a little less apparent that I'm thinking about and that really grow out of what we see across the movement are the following. Number one, where are Jewish students going to be? They're going to be in far more places, and therefore Jewish families, I believe, are going to be in a much more dispersed geographic distribution. Right now, more than 50% of Jewish families in America live in 3 states: New York, California, and Florida. I believe that's going to change. Now, why do I believe that? Part of it is if you simply look at climate change and more macro dynamics that go well beyond how we think about Jewish life, those are going to have impact and I think drive change. We're seeing that from, again, macro workplace dynamics. In an environment where people can work anywhere, people are going to work anywhere. And then, at a more Jewish specific level, we already see today on campus a decreasing Jewish population at a lot of the institutions that had traditionally been very large Jewish student communities, and a very clear increase in Jewish students appearing on campuses that are non-flagship state institutions, community colleges, commuter schools, even just not pursuing traditional education. So greater dispersion. We will see a larger overall Jewish community, which, for all the people who worry about continuity, to me, the good news is we're going to have a bigger community. We already saw from the recent study out of the Brandeis Center, a much higher overall projected community size in North America. But even if you simply look at other factors, not only what we were talking about, which is you're going to have a more diverse dispersion of Jewish families that by definition will grow the overall number of families that have a Jewish connection. But on top of that, again, look at what we're doing today. All of the investments of Hillel, of Chabad on campus, of Taglit, that is a leading indicator to an enormous amount of identity formation that, again, we can wring our hands about what we're not doing, but I think what we are doing is going to translate into a much wider base of people in America in 2050 who feel connected to the Jewish community. Final thing, because we want to keep going, is our institutional context in Jewish life is going to look very different. And that's going to be a function of philanthropy changing and requiring organizations like Hillel and many others to really change with philanthropy, but also with what we're literally doing tonight, which is creating and supporting micro communities. I think you're going to see a lot more democratization in terms of how Jewish life gets expressed in 2050 compared to today, and certainly compared to the past. So let's that's a lot, and hopefully a lot to work with. On to question 2.
Wow. Well, that was an incredible breadth that you just shared there. And I touched on family structures, on race in America, on the nonprofit landscape, on diversity in American higher education, on geographic trends, and more. So there's a lot of fodder already out here. That's a descriptive. That's the lay of the land, who's out there, what American Judaism looks like now for its youngest cohort or younger cohorts, and what it will look like based on that looking forward. Terrific. Now I want to move from the descriptive question to a prescriptive question, which is, what has Hillel learned about what works for engaging Jews? And I want to say that kind of, there's a set of methodologies, a kind of a knowledge base, a set of best practices that the field has, which, my experience being a member of and working in other parts of the Jewish world are not kind of uniformly shared. And so if you could tell us kind of how you look at the work, what you feel like the kind of distilled core is. And I often think of apparently the venture capitalist Peter Thiel likes to ask people when they pitch him on an idea, is what's something that everyone else thinks is false? Right? Like, what's that kind of that core piece of knowledge that not only other people have, it's kind of the opposite. It's a twist. It's unconventional. And another way to ask is, like, if you were to, everyone were to come to you and say, what's one thing we should do differently in our organization? What would you tell them?
Yeah, great question. Not an easy question. And meanwhile, Peter Thiel just made several billion more dollars. So, if that's validation of his wisdom, then more power to him. I think there are several things, and they actually tie into some of the themes I was trying to hit on relative to what we'll see in 2050. One thing that we do at Hillel that is so fundamental to not only our current success, but how we think about successful Jewish life into the future is radical inclusivity. Not trying to draw lines or set limits around who we're engaging with and who can feel a part of our community at Hillel. That is so constitutional to who we are and what we do. And it works. We know it works because that's how we are able to engage at breadth to the level I was describing before. And it's also just core philosophy for who we are. We are radically inclusive, and I would say radically pluralistic. We are not denominated. Again, we're not bounded in that way in terms of what it means to be a part of a Jewish community, to create Jewish experiences. We want to empower the young people that we're privileged to serve to actually lead us and create their own experiences, because as Uri said, they are going to define whatever we may say. They are going to define what the Jewish future entails. A second thing that that I see is really meaningful in today's Hillel, and I would say it's just a continuing evolution from where Hillel has been, is a focus on, call it user experience and user design, meaning we get and we know that it is not about prescribing for students, here is what your Jewish life should be, and effectively saying, here's what you get, show up because your parents told you to, come to Hillel for Shabbat dinner or study or volunteer or whatever else you may think is here. We have a Jewish Learning Fellowship where we've taken it from a few campuses to now more than 250 campuses, from a few students to more than 4,000, studying in a Torah-based way current issues and issues that matter to them, looking at sources, really integrating deep Jewish learning into their lives. And they're doing it in an environment that is based on real care of, okay, what is that room like? Whether it's a virtual room or a physical room, and is there joy and is there relevance? And have we really thought about the way that students will take that experience in? Because we're competing with great other user experiences and user design. And so we have to take that seriously, and I think we do. Finally, and these are all of a part, but embracing Jewish and, which means, rather than treating the reality for students that they have competing interests and they have competing identities as a threat to how we can foster strong Jewish communities, looking at that as an incredible virtue, so that we can, whether it's through other organizational life, interfaith, cross-community building, Israel engagement, whatever it may be, that there's the opportunity to address students in their totality. They're whole people, and we have to meet them where they are in terms of their total identity. Sometimes that means we have to take seriously their challenges, which may not feel like Jewish challenges. It may be mental health, it may be wellness, but that's about taking care of the whole student and creating space for them inside our communities.
Great. I want to pick up on something you touched on. An alum actually submitted a question. I requested anonymity. He's also a contractor with Hillel, so I'm going to convey on his behalf, which is the language of mental health, which you just brought up. Right? So, a major the word pandemic was used in a New York Times article this week. College counseling centers tend to have backlogs that are measured not in days but in weeks. And the question was about the language of wellness, which is often bandied about. And I'll share personally, is often there's something very compelling about it, and there's also something that can feel somewhat superficial about it. Do a meditation thing when you're dealing with compound trauma from childhood, or a really well-placed anxiety about whether your grandchildren will have a habitable planet anymore. Like that's and so if you could speak to kind of the language of wellness, and especially the ways that it relates to other values and practices around kind of deep Jewish practices, the community, study, prayer, service, food. But really kind of, show us in the kind of the nitty gritty, which you just mentioned, the questions which may not feel Jewish on their presentation, how you are guiding Hillels and professionals and students in thinking about and working through the challenges of being a young person, finding their way in the world in the context of Jewish tradition.
Yeah, so many things to say about this. It's such an important topic. We could spend an entire hour just on this. I'll say a few things at a threshold level. First of all, just let's be really clear that I am supporting, I am stewarding, I am trying to help the heroes on campus that include you, Jason, that include Uri, that include, Rabbi Isama, Ziv. There's so many that you all are the ones doing miraculous things. I am here to help and try to translate and cut across in terms of where we go. And by the way, that is one of the things when we say back in the last question, what works well, we have this beautiful distributed community that represents a hothouse of innovation with hundreds of centers for entrepreneurial Judaism. And so that's really powerful. On wellness specifically, I don't think we need to apologize for the fact that we are not a counseling center and that what we do cannot handle the most severe cases of trauma or real clinical issues of mental health. It doesn't allow us, as the saying goes, to desist from the work of trying to make sure that we are there for students. And if we are going to build strong Jewish communities, it starts with supporting the students overall, and wellness is a critical part of that. What we are doing are the following things. One, we do need every Hillel professional to be trained to understand the broad scope of how to support student wellness and to be able to recognize the serious and real issues that do arise. And so we're actually in the middle of a training program through which about 500 Hillel professionals have already completed the training, and we'll be working with the remaining 700 to complete it as well. And that training not only provides knowledge, it provides real resources in terms of interventions that are appropriate for non-mental health care professionals, as well as the knowledge and capabilities to be able to refer to more serious resource providers when that makes sense. Second, we are actually experimenting with embedded social work models. So we have 7 campuses who now have embedded full-time social workers who are working in partnership with Jewish Life staff to provide an even higher level of overall social service support. And then third, and this goes more to some of the elements that you were referring to, we are like unrepentantly integrative in terms of how we think about Hillel experience and Jewish experience. And that means that we do see opportunities to blend together other practices like meditation, yoga, and the like in Jewish roots. I will say personally, some of the deepest experiences I've had have been in Jewish meditative chanting or silent Jewish meditation retreats. So, we have found ways to integrate in that space. We have found ways to integrate, there are Jewish Peloton and Soul Cycle groups that are popping up across Hillel. And how powerful and cool can that be? Anyone who's done, not to be so, 2021 about it, but anyone who's done Sundays with Love in Peloton knows that, this blending of these very contemporary practices with spiritual content, can lead to real value for students. And we don't, coming back to not being apologetic, we do work from a place of Jewish community, from a place of Jewish wisdom, a place of Jewish practice, and a place of Jewish text. And so we have done so much of this in ways that, number one, lead students into spaces where they can discover some of these deeper Jewish experiences, and where we know from our own data that students do tend to just find more interest and opportunity in those deeper Jewish experiences, even if they start with something that may feel far afield from core Jewish experience.
Beautiful. The crowd here has not taken long to move to the heat, which is Israel and BDS. So there's 2 questions. One is from Benjamin Lipson about handling BDS and anti-Semitism on campus, and the other one was from someone who chatted me privately, and because of the sensitivity, actually asked that they not be identified. But I want to share the question because it's quite powerful. This person's an alum of Yale, active member of the Jewish community. And mentioned a recent incident where Angela Davis was invited to speak at Northeastern University And the Hillel put out a statement kind of lamenting her invitation. And this student was lamenting that lament itself in terms of where this positions the Jewish community politically and morally. So with that in the one, and noting the kind of the fear that kind of permeates this environment, which is expressed by that request, I think, totally understandable for anonymity. Benjamin, if you would ask your question also, and then Adam, we'll put you at the crux of these two opposing forces as we kind of perform some pluralism on Israel and ask you to bear the brunt of it.
So I was wondering across the country how much BDS or anti-Israel activity there is and how Hillel staff are dealing with it and how you're training student leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. And we definitely will hit both sides of this. We continue to see significant and I believe unfortunate level of anti-Israel activity across college campuses. Now, I don't want to be an alarmist in that, as Uri was saying early on, what we do and what students experience is so much wider than that. And at the same time, there are moments in an academic year when for Hillel's student leaders and campuses, BDS campaigns or other anti-Israel campaigns can be consuming. From a data point of view, we have not seen an overall decrease, notwithstanding the pandemic, which is quite interesting. A lot of those activities and campaigns have moved online or remained in person. That said, we are doing quite a bit to try to address the issues at a what I'll say systemic level. Number one, at the Hill International level of the work, we're providing support to local Hill professionals. At the end of the day, the team at the Slifka Center, if the campus involved is Yale, needs to make determinations around how to engage with the community when these issues arise. So we're providing support in terms of student leader training, professional training, and sending resource so that the Jewish community can represent itself in these contexts. Again, representing itself can mean a lot of different things. Clearly, there is no one, quote, answer to how to address issues of anti-Israel campaigns or the like when they arise. In some cases, that the answer for a local campus and community involves fighting back in the forum or venue where issues are being raised. In other cases, it's really about building relationships across campus so that those partnerships really define the way the Jewish community relates to other communities, and not giving oxygen to what can feel really problematic. In other cases, it's about the Jewish community engaging with other communities relative to whatever concerns are being floated to Israel or otherwise. But so bottom line, we are there to provide support. I would say Hillels and Jewish communities more broadly have been effective at least trying to prevent those kinds of campaigns eroding campus climate for Jewish students. And that at the end of the day, let's be real about what these campaigns do and don't represent. They don't evolve into real consequence at a university policy level, at a financial divestment level. For me, the biggest concern is the way that campaigns can devolve into isolation of Jewish communities on campus or Jewish students feeling at an identity level like they can't express their identities when it comes to those kinds of dynamics. So the final thing I'll mention is we have a new campus climate initiative where we're working with the university administrators. So at an anti-Semitism level, more broadly, they are well educated on what anti-Semitism represents, how anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism can and do intersect, and how to create the kind of campus climate that supports healthy Jewish student life in the same way we want to see campuses create a healthy campus climate for other student populations as well. So that's the overview. Again, I'm happy to go deeper on any one part if there are follow-up questions.
I do want to follow up on the Angela Davis part, which, I mean, everything you've said has been super important, but and totally apt. And then there's the other side in terms of just the conflict when it's happening. And I think, you know, Angela Davis at Northeastern is as good an example as any. So kind of, would you speak to how you think and feel your way through those moments, what it's like for you to see those statements and those invitations go out and be rescinded sometimes?
Yeah, and the first thing I want to share here is more humility around the reality that we're talking about complicated issues with competing values that I don't think any of us have found a silver bullet pathway to addressing. To back it up a little bit, I have not seen this statement, but I'll give what I understand to be some of the facts. So for anyone listening, you know, we're thinking around the same basics. As I understand it, you know, there was an invitation. I don't even know who made the invitation for Angela Davis to come and speak at a program at Northeastern University. The Northeastern Hillel put out a statement in opposition to that appearance. And regardless of the specifics, to be honest, we are constantly seeing play out a real tension. And it's a tension between, on the one hand, our really strong commitment to, as I said before, being inclusive, being pluralistic, welcoming every Jewish student, and really trying to promote, you know, a lot of relationship building across campus communities. And on the other hand, situations where portions of the Jewish student community, or really the broader community, feel like events occurring on campus threaten the health, safety, and climate for that community. And that, I think, is what ends up in contention. And the only other added complexity, these are not answers, but these are just recognitions of the complexity of dynamics, is, you know, the kind of federal state or, you know, global local dynamic here, which is Northeastern Hillel, much like the Slipka Center, is an independent 501c3 organization. As I said before, there's something really powerful in that, because, you know, that extra degree of local autonomy does allow for a lot of local innovation and customization. It does mean that sometimes what Northeastern Hillel may express may feel different from what the Slipka Center may express, or Stanford Hillel may express, or, you know, pick your any number of hundreds of examples. And so back to tensions, we have a Hillel movement, and we do have some core values, and we try to maintain what it means to be a part of the Hillel movement. But sometimes, even within the Hillel community, those will be in contention. Final thought on this, which you may not always be the most either popular or understandable, but to me, it's very clear. Foundationally, Israel is a part of who Hillel is and what Hillel's work entails. We see it that way because, you know, Israel is a part of Jewish everything. It is part of Jewish history. It is a part of Jewish theology. It is a part of contemporary Jewish life. And as a function of all of that, you know, we do, as part of our core commitments, pursue Israel engagement on behalf of the student communities we work with, and really seek to make Israel a part of the totality of what we offer in what Jewish students can access. And so, back to competing values, there are times where that aspect of our work, it's not the totality of our work by any stretch, but that aspect can come into conflict, as we know, with other organizations or individual speakers and the like. And, you know, day by day, we do our best to mediate and resolve that conflict. I am always open to other people's perspectives on how we can do that better. But, you know, we're going to, like the rest of American society in this moment, sometimes just muddle through in terms of trying to mediate as best we can.
Wonderful. And I think that, I mean, the commitment to so many different values and holding them all is so powerful in what you just articulated. I have a follow-up. We're not gonna spend the whole time on Israel, but it's so important in its own right, as you said. And it also has become such a powerful place for when we can actually being in dialogue. And I don't want to lose that tonight. I don't want to move away from that tension and energy too quickly. So there's a follow-up question here from Michael Zenger Tischler, who's a beloved recent alum of Yale. So I want to showcase you, Michael, and give you a chance to ask your question. It's nice to see you here tonight.
And so I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to all of us and alums too. I'll just say, I mean, I submitted that question, and I was the president of the Hillel, and Hillel is one of the most important places to me. And I'm also struck by sort of the fact that I feel scared to ask that question, right? And feel scared to have these discussions. And I'm as institutional as it gets, but I know there are a lot of other students when I was at Yale who wouldn't come to Hillel because they were afraid of, being outcast because of their Israel views. And so I'm kind of curious, when I, God willing, one day have children, and I think and build them with love of Israel, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, but not necessarily the modern instantiation of the state of Israel, what am I supposed to tell them about their place in Hillel and their ability to belong with those views? I understand that there are a lot of students who feel really uncomfortable with BDS, and I totally get where that's coming from, actually, as someone who spent a lot of time with them. But I'm also really curious, what do you do for these other students who really feel left out and excluded by some of these Hillel policies? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I'd love to, buy you a virtual copy and, in a longer format, hear your take on some of this, because clearly you're thinking about it in a deep way. And, I need to learn from you, and we all need to kind of be listening to each other around where we go here. It pains me. It really pains me, actually, because again, back to competing values, as the Hillel team at the Slivka Center knows, we talk about every Jewish student. We are here for every Jewish student. And I talked before about a really expansive definition of what that even means, right? Anyone who wants to connect and be a part of our Jewish community. And so how do we do that in a way where we still have certain organizational values that become, let's face it, lightning rods that divide students, or where, as you said, a student can feel uncomfortable like that? It's painful. I think that's the best way I can put it in terms of how we get there, or get to where people don't feel like there is risk or threat for taking a certain position or having a certain view. I think a couple things here. One, we have to be honest about it. We have to be honest about what's difficult, and just acknowledge the reality, even at a student level, the fact there are some students who will be very uncomfortable if a student or student group comes in to, in their view, really undermine Israel in a way that they view as morphing into anti-Semitism, and that there are other students who feel completely silenced or even alienated themselves because they have a different view of the modern state of Israel, or the current administration in Israel, or specific policies. And so everyone has to be able to hear one another. And honestly, our ninja skill, our highest order of value as Hillel professionals, needs to be in being able to hold that community together, even with the conflict and the pain. It doesn't solve the policy question, but I think it just paints the picture of if we are going to be relevant, where we need to go. A couple other quick things here. One is that think about the Hillel model. We're a little vakakta, right? We're a little crazy because we continue to try to be the big tent Jewish organization. One other organization is truly trying to bring together every part of the Jewish community, nurture that as a totality, as a community, but also in ways that honor each individual within the community. Are we, the Jewish version of Don Quixote? Are we tilting at a windmill here? I don't know, but it gives me passion in terms of the work. And I think, for many Hillel colleagues, this, we believe, is where we need to go, which means we have to take on that tension. Final thought, which may feel like a bit of a dodge, but I think it's a real factor here. We framed this around 2050. What are these issues going to look like in 2050? Here are a couple of things I think. I think Israel is going to feel and look fundamentally different in 2050. We're already seeing changing regional dynamics. What will that look like in 30 years? Will Israel be the 10th biggest economy in the world? There's a pretty decent chance it may be. What are the implications of that? How will other disruption, again, what Israel is in terms of its social stratification and composition is going to feel different. What we see as social dynamics here. So I do think it's not that we're going to get a free pass. I think we're going to have to fight our way through these complicated dynamics today, and that the playing field is going to keep changing in a way where we'll have other big challenges, but this may feel a little bit in the rear view, even a decade from now.
Wow. I want so much to continue this conversation all night. And we do that night after night at the Slifka Center. So when we're back in person after renovation, I invite you to come. There's an Israel Education Fellowship. We have student working groups, and it's really, there's amazing partners and Israel educators at Hillel International. So this is, you all just got a taste of it. I want to pivot now to my colleague, Uri Cohen, who has a lot of experience, very, very different Hillels, having worked at Queens and now at Yale, and a lot of deep involvement in really every branch, age bracket, segment. I could do all these motions of the Jewish world. Uri, I'm curious, what you are most curious to hear Adam's thoughts and perspectives on right now.
Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Adam, again. I'm wondering, Adam, the answers that you recently gave, that you just gave to some of the questions around Israel, are in some ways the same and in some ways different from answers that Hillel International might have given in years past. I'm curious to hear, your thoughts about that trajectory, if to the extent that you have. The other thing is that in my work, I've really come to understand that from my perspective, Hillel's main goal with respect to Israel, but all kinds of other things too, is to make sure that the next generation cares, that the next generation has a real serious feeling about Israel, and it doesn't necessarily demand what that position looks like about Israel any more than it necessarily does about hot button issues of generations past, like belief in God or intermarriage or any other type of issue that has roiled the Jewish community in years past. So I'm curious to what extent that piece about making sure that the next generation cares, that the next generation of whether it's members of Congress or society leaders or anything else is committed to Israel aside from any particular political view. How much that resonates with you and the way you talk and think about this work.
Yeah. Thanks, Uri. And I get so much, not only inspiration, but thought leadership from you and so many other directors around the field who are informing the way I look at this. I would macrotize, I'll make that word up, but I would supersize from your question in two respects. On the way that I think about whether it's the Israel issues or really any other complicated issues in our work, I'm so committed to us being a learning organization. We have to keep an open mind and an open eye to all of the different voices and perspectives that animate our community, particularly at a student level, but even more broadly with stakeholders, with professionals and the like. And that means we have to be willing to be vulnerable around what we don't know and what we can learn and even looking at, other domains, to try to get answers. So, and it really takes what sometimes people will point to as a liability. Well, Hillel is not the same everywhere, and turns it into an asset, which is, again, we have so many different fountains of thinking, innovation, and inspiration in terms of how that Jewish life gets expressed. If we open ourselves to that, there are so many answers out there that can lead us and guide us forward. On the second piece of this, the word that you said that I think is so important for all of us is relevance. And if the word that came to mind for me with Michael's question was pain, the pain as a community of how do we come together, even in the context of what really often divides us. Relevance is my up at night question. And it's been that way since the day I got to Hillel, which is, it doesn't really ultimately matter how we mediate any specific issues around Israel, or as you said, around what defines the Jewish community, or Shabbat, or you can pick your frame. Generations are just going to pass us by. And even if we look at Gen Z today, we are living, everyone is a Jew by choice. And so we are living in an environment where we have got to understand that, not mope about it or complain about it, because again, some people do, right? Like, why isn't anyone at shul, on Shabbat? Or why is the average age in this building, 70 instead of 25? No, own the fact that we have to create great experiences. There is so much that is beautiful and powerful in Jewish technology, right? The DNA of what is available to us is just endless and overwhelming in its beauty and power. It's on us to create the relevance so that this generation and those that follow can access it. And let's all keep losing sleep, because if we lose sleep over relevance, whether it's at an Israel level, at a Tikkun Olam and social justice level, at a deep Jewish learning level, at a Jewish practice, and that level, at a community relationship, like whatever turns someone on, let's get serious about making sure we are creating the experiences that are relevant, that have great user experience. And if we do that, and we already, again, back to Jason's earlier question, we know that when we do that, it's just beautiful. We support the development and empowerment of young people in ways that they go on and change the world. They change the Jewish future, and they add incredible value to the world writ large. And so that's the playbook. And let's just keep worrying about relevance.
Follow-up question for you, Adam. You talk about relevance. How do you make sure that doesn't equate to diluted or watered down Judaism?
Yeah, also great. And back to like our core kishkis around pluralism, like that can also be viewed as a crutch towards Judaism light, right? Oh, okay, there's a little Jewish, and I actually think there have been moments in Hillel's history where it's viewed as, okay, the bagel brunch, but that's not the place you go for like serious Jewish learning or serious Israel engagement, or other aspects of Jewish practice. I don't accept these constructs as being mutually exclusive. I really, back to Jewish and I not only believe that we can enable deep Jewish experiences that are grounded in Jewish text, wisdom, practice, and that are relevant. And again, you guys and so many Hillels around the world are proving that every day, where we are defining relevance, in the engagement of students, and it's a collage that maybe it does have the bagel brunch, and maybe it does have things that are really just about bringing a community together, but then that is mapping into the Jewish Learning Fellowship and the Onward Israel experience, and the mitzvot initiative that is doing civic engagement with real Jewish learning attached. So that is both our challenge, but I think we prove every day that it's achievable. And I mentioned the 140,000. People could throw a stone and say, well, but so what? So what if they came a couple times to, Shabbat dinner, or maybe not even to a barbecue? We have 50,000 students who are spending time in deep ways, whether with Israel engagement or Jewish learning or, Jewish practice, or in leadership. And so it can work. We're making it work. And it's exciting to be able, in partnership with you all and the many people participating, to figure out how we make it work. I don't know if we have final thoughts yet. You'll tell me, Jason, but if we are,
I've got one. I need to pause for station identification and have one more question from Joanne here. So just before we get to final thoughts, penultimate thoughts from me. I want to just pause station identification. I want to say huge thank yous to Adam, of course. It's been awesome. It's like a spoken word performance listening to you. To Jamie, who's been on the call, a real great partner in crime, and the whole Hillel at Home team, including Benjamin Laufer, a beloved Slifka alum, my colleague, Slifka Center's Executive Director, Uri Cohen, and Jennifer Rogen Wallace, and I saw Ziva Eisenberg, and I was on the call, and the whole team. It's a great team. You should come join us for Shabbat when you can, or to work. We have a lot of fun, as you can tell. And to all of you on the call for making tonight happen. And for our last question, I want to turn things over to Joanne, who had a really interesting question about reaching out to students who might be less involved, especially those in Greek life. So Joanne, take it away. Last shot at Adam.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can share some of the best practices for the ways that Hillels around the country are engaging most optimally with Jewish fraternities and sororities on campuses, and somehow helping to inspire students who might have joined the fraternity or sorority because they identify culturally with their Judaism, but how you work to inspire to strengthen their Jewish identities, their Jewish knowledge, maybe celebrate holidays together, Shabbat meals together. I know Slifka Center does a really great job with the bagel brunches, and I know some try to get a birthright experience for these kids. But I'm just wondering, as a parent who hopes that, or as many parents who hope that their kids will continue some form of Jewish education or identification, how Hillel does that best.
Yeah, great question, Joanne, and appreciate you raising it. And again, this is part of what makes Hillel, which is we are trying to reach out and engage every Jewish student, regardless of how they see their own level of affiliation, or even regardless of what they think may be available to them through the Jewish community. I'll focus on the Greek organization part of it, because again, it's a very real aspect of our work and of where college students are today. And full disclosure, I have 2 daughters in